My name is Rabbi Mordechai Lightstone. I had the pleasure of doing a couple of these, and it's great to do it again, and great to see some familiar faces as well. And I just want to make sure everyone can see the screen right now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the question is Bitcoin kosher Gelt? And of course, thematically, we have some Hanukkah Gelt going on the screen as well in a little GIF I made. What that means to say is obviously there are a lot of different angles to approach this, and we're going to approach it from one particular level. And that is the question of interest, ribis in Hebrew, which it is biblically forbidden to charge interest to other Jews, largely speaking. And therefore, that creates a practical ramification if Bitcoin is considered to be money or a commodity. So the Torah tells us you shall not give interest to your brother, whether it be interest on money, interest on food, or interest on any other item from which interest is normally taken. Meaning that the prohibition to charge interest doesn't just mean if I lend someone $100 that they can't then give me back $110. This parenthetically is something called a heter iska. There are business, the rabbis realized that without the ability for people to charge some interest on a loan, then people weren't lending money, which was important to allow other people to be able to survive, to give loans. And so therefore there's something called a heter iska, which is a business partnership which people can enter in order to be able to borrow and charge some interest. There are kind of complications around that and how that works. It's a whole other discussion, another class. But largely speaking, we don't charge interest. And that doesn't just mean that if I lend someone $100, they have to pay me $100 back. But if I lend someone some other item as well, they also need to make sure not to charge interest and give me back. If I loan one loaf of bread, I have to get a loaf of bread back, not 2 loaves of bread or the like. Now, here's the question then. If I'm lending money, if I lend someone $100, and we'll get back to Bitcoin, as you see this develop. If I lend someone $100, then they have to pay me $100 back. That's pretty clear cut. But what happens if I lend someone a certain amount of wheat, right? I'm a farmer or a baker, let's say, and the baker borrows a certain amount of wheat from the farmer in order to be able to bake bread, and he's going to pay him back. How does that, how does the prohibition of interest apply? So the rabbis taught in the Talmud, in the Mishnah for Bava Metzia, that if someone says, lend me a kor, which is a certain rabbinic measurement of wheat, a pretty large one, and I will repay you at the threshing time, so give me some wheat now, I'm going to plant it in the ground, I'm going to grow some more wheat, and I'll pay you back next season, the wheat that I grow from the wheat that you lent me, in order that way I can be able to now have a lot more wheat, right? I'm planting, one grain of wheat will now grow a whole stock of wheat, which will then give me many more kernels. So it seems like a great and pretty even business request. And I'm just asking you to pay me back wheat for wheat, pound for pound, measure for measure of wheat. That is not allowed. Why? As the wheat may increase in value, which would mean that he gives him back a core of wheat at the time the wheat is brought to the granary. It is worth more than the value of the loan. It is therefore will have paid interest. So someone can't do that. You can't do that. Why? Because right now on the market, wheat is worth, let's say $100 per bushel or whatever it is. So for a core, we'll use the rabbinic measurement. And when he actually goes ahead, it's a whole season later. And there was a drought that year and there's less wheat available. And now the wheat is now worth $200 a core. So therefore, because of the increase in value of the commodity, it's considered interest even if he gives back the same amount that he borrowed. But he may say there is, however, an exception. Lend it to me until my son comes home, or he'll find the key. Let's say the guy, he has the wheat available. He has wheat in his granary. He doesn't have the keys. His son is bringing it from the market. And therefore, it's a relatively short amount of time between when he's making the request and when he actually goes ahead and fulfills it and pays it back. And as well, he has the product existing. He has it in his granary. He has the wheat. He just doesn't have it available right now. So in that case, it would be allowed. But Hillel used to forbid this. Moreover, Hillel said, a woman may not lend a loaf of bread to her neighbor unless she determines its value in money, lest wheat should rise in price, and they are found to be engaging in usury. That what happens if I give, at the time in the Talmud, women normally were the ones who baked the bread. But let's say I have a loaf of bread and I give it to my friend, and then my friend gives me back a loaf of bread. And in the meantime, it's because of Corona, everyone is baking. Flour is more expensive. The value of the wheat has, shot up, and now my sourdough loaf is worth much more than it was beforehand. that would be interest according to Hillel. The actual law does not follow Hillel in this extent. Rather, it's the way the rabbis say that it's only if it's a large amount and it's a considerable period of time, but you could lend a loaf for a loaf, as we'll see. So, all this is to say, it is forbidden to lend a sa for a sa. This is the actual rabbinic term in Jewish law. It's called sa b'sa. A sa is a medium rabbinic measurement. I think it's about 8.5 kilo. That's like a kilo, I think, yeah, 8.5 kilo. So even if they didn't set it, so it's forbidden to lend a sa for a sa, a measurement of wheat for measurement of wheat, even if they didn't set a time for a payment. Same holds for all transactions outside of those with the currency in popular use. So any transaction I make according to the Code of Jewish law, as long as it's not with money, then I have to be careful that this is then considered a commodity and it's subject to the rules of price fluctuation. And therefore, when I repay that loan, I have to make sure to repay that loan in the amount that it was worth at the time in currency, as opposed to the actual item itself. Why? Perhaps the value will rise, and it will come out that the loan was repaid with more than what was borrowed. If a return of merchandise is made, you need to return the amount equivalent to the value of the merchandise at the time it was borrowed. With currency, however, one can simply borrow and return the same amount of money. So even though, theoretically speaking, the value of the dollar will rise and fall, nevertheless, if I borrow money from someone and I repay them the same amount, even if the value of the dollar went up, it's still considered a kosher loan. I don't have to worry about issues of interest. But any other item that is subject to the fluctuations of price of the market, since it's a commodity, when I repay that loan, I don't repay the value of the item. I don't repay with the item itself. I repay the value of the item. That way I make sure that I have not charged interest to the person I'm engaging in that transaction with. So this is the general kind of breakdown in Jewish law in regards to the rules of interest in terms of for commodities versus cash. So, just as a parenthetical note, there are some exceptions made when it comes to borrowing something. So if I actually borrow a loaf of bread, for example, that would be okay. So the Ramah, which is the second part of the Code of Jewish law, says an exception can be made when borrowing a very small amount, such as a loaf of bread. It's permitted to return a loaf, since any potential discrepancy in the price is generally considered insignificant. Therefore, people are not bothered. So therefore, small exchanges, small loans, let me borrow this and I'll give you that thing back, give me a can of Coke, I'll buy you a can of Coke tomorrow, or whatever it is, give me a beer now, I'll give you a beer later. That's not considered an issue of interest because it's relatively small, relatively brief, and it's not considered something that's subject to large amounts of price fluctuation. So, let's check if there are any, I heard a sound, if there are any questions in the comments over there. 1 second. So Lianka wants to know, what about if the operating in Zimbabwe dollars or something else that is hyper variable? That is actually what we are moving to right now. So what about currency? This, generally speaking, is about currency when it comes to the money we actually deal with. So we're functioning in a dollar's state of mind. So what about currency? Devalued or obsolete currency, or money that isn't considered legal tender until it's exchanged for some other coin, they are considered a commodity in all matters. This is from the Code of Jewish Law, from Kosher Mishpat, which deals with various monetary transactions. And some say, the Ramah adds, that even money that has not become completely obsolete, but rather it isn't in common use, is also called a commodity. This is considered the main opinion. So therefore, you think about historically, to the Jewish people who were in, the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe, 400, years ago, 300 years ago, really, we're speaking about this point in time. And they were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They're part of one country, where they're using one set of money. And then what happens, the Russians conquer, the Tsar conquers, now they're under a different rulership of a different nation, and both forms of money are in play or not. Maybe they're only using the Polish money, or maybe they're only using the Tsarist money, right? Coins used to change a lot. Every king would have a new coin printed, and other coins are in use. So what goes on? What's the basic understanding of this? Any money that I can go on the street and do a transaction with, and nobody looks at this as some sort of weird other thing, but it's in common use, you could use as currency, and therefore if I borrow 100 of this coin and I could pay back 100 of that coin. If, however, it's not in common use, it's either entirely obsolete or entirely not of value in the country I'm in. So in America, let's say the euro doesn't, it can't use the euro on the street, even though it's legal money in Europe. So in America, the euro would be considered to be a commodity. It's foreign exchange. It's not considered money in the code of Jewish law. And even if some places will take it, if it's not the common coin, if it's not the money that everyone is looking to use, then also it's considered a commodity. It's not considered money. And the issues of charging interest on it now come into play. That if I borrow a certain amount of this obsolete coin, or this not commonly used coin, and I want to pay it back, I have to pay back the loan in the value of the object and not when the loan actually took place, and not with the item itself, because the item itself may have changed in price and it would be considered interest. And this really is the answer when it comes to Bitcoin itself. That relatively, simple from this point of view, that Bitcoin would be considered a commodity. It's not something that is currently in wide use in America. It's not legally recognized. Legal recognition is definitely key to this. And since it's not considered, it's not legally recognized, I believe, by any country, unless maybe someone knows otherwise, but definitely not here in America, it would not be considered a currency and would be considered a commodity. And I think the price fluctuation around Bitcoin and other crypto in general that we're seeing right now, this was kind of the impetus to this talk, was the current increase in price and attention to it again. So because of that, it would be considered a commodity, not money. And therefore, if I borrowed one Bitcoin from you, a number of years ago, and I was now paying you that Bitcoin back, it would not be paid back in one Bitcoin. And unfortunately, you or someone lent it to me, I would not be making whatever the value is of Bitcoin coin today on the market. Rather, it would be the value it was when that loan took place. It's a commodity. And that is kind of the general discussion around what Bitcoin would be considered in Jewish law. But there's obviously, number one, Bitcoin itself is not the limits to blockchain technology. There's much more, and many other exciting things which are beyond my field of expertise. And there has to be a lesson to learn from this as well, because every conversation that I take part in and teach definitely should have something that inspires us as human beings to do more. So what is the lesson we can learn from Bitcoin and really from blockchain technology writ large? So there's a lesson we can learn from the idea of a ledger, where we could see the historical transactions that take place with that certain line of code over and over again from its inception and onwards. There's a lesson for us as Jews when this comes as well, and for people in general. It's a human lesson that in Avot, and the sages taught in Pirkei Avot, contemplate three things, and you'll not come to the hands of transgression. Know what is above from you: a seeing eye, a listening ear, and all your deeds are inscribed in a book. Everything you do is written down. In general, I tell people when it comes to the internet that everyone should print this particular teaching in Pirkei Avot and paste it on the wall in front of their computer or in front of their smartphone when they do it, because everything you do has a record. Nothing is truly anonymous on the internet. Even as many precautions as it takes, someone's going to take a screenshot, it's going to get out there. Everything you do is written down, and it's a great way to understand how God is aware of everything we do as well. But in a simple sense, all the deeds you do are inscribed in a book, and therefore there is a blockchain record of everything we do in heaven, as it were, that shows every transaction, everything we are involved in. What does that mean? So there is a Chassidic teaching, and with this we'll conclude. There's a Chassidic teaching around this idea as well. And that is, it was taught by Rabbi Dov Ber Mezrich. He was the second generation, the leader of the second generation of the Chassidic movement. And he taught, know that everything above, all the spiritual realms, is from you. So he's rereading the sentence, depending on you and your actions. That it really is a call to action for each and every one of us, not just that everything we do is somehow recorded and viewed on high and remembered on high, and has and has a lasting legacy, but rather the entire existence of the universe, all things that exist in this world, ultimately are dependent on our actions. They're waiting on each and every one of us as individuals to do something truly unique and to change the world, and that through that action, everything, all the heavenly spheres, all the divine emanations, all the angels, as it were, everything going on in heaven is all waiting on each and every one of us to do something. And it's something that really applies to each and every individual, because every individual is truly unique. And the fact that each and every one of us is here in this world is because each of us has the ability to make an impact in this world that's unique. If someone else could do what I could do, or I could do what they could do, one of us wouldn't be here. The fact that we're all here is because each of us has a unique mission in this world, and it's all dependent on us. And so therefore, that is a final meditation, as it were. Each and every one of us has the ability to do transformational acts that will change the world, and then all of those acts are everlasting as they are inscribed in the divine ledger, as it were. And so this one was a relatively a shorter talk, so we have a little bit more time for Q&A if we want. But if you want to follow what we do on Twitter and on social media in general, I'm Muttle, at Muttle, and TechTribe can be found at My TechTribe. We also have a newsletter, mytechtribe.org/dispatch, which I'm excited about and like to share. And if you'd like to join, and read that, hopefully you'd find it interesting as well. But I will end the presentation, and we can have a couple minutes to talk.